room in Paris with a giant toothache, and I was looking at what you usually, look through those old magazines, old newspapers, and somehow I fell onto a small article, but the picture really called my attention. It was the Twin Towers, but in their model form, because it was in 1968 and they had not yet started to be built. And I had not yet started to be a wire walker, which is actually the amazing part of the story. So how could I fall in love with those two towers, the highest towers in the world, said the article. So presumptuous, so arrogant, so naive, so romantic. And it was all of that, and I remember I had to tear the article, and everybody was watching me, in France everybody's watching each other, and it was very quiet, and I couldn't read the page, and plus you don't steal something. So I actually let go a giant sneeze, and under the cover of the sneeze, I teared the article, put it under my shirt, and I had to leave, and I had to find another dentist. But what was it to have a toothache for another week when what I had now in my chest was a dream?
Uma das mais pungentes ironias da história do World Trade Center é que a saga de seu crescimento físico, um dos grandes feitos de engenharia de sua era, passou despercebida na época e só foi apreciada depois da catástrofe. Desde o início, o desafio de construir duas torres imensas, não só mais altas, mas maiores do que quaisquer outras no mundo, forçaria os operários e engenheiros de Austin Tobin a reinventar a tecnologia e os projetos de arranha-céus. Eles desafiariam não só a altura, mas os princípios básicos da construção de seu grande rival, o Empire State, e produziriam uma das maiores obras de arte da engenharia.
I think the genius of the towers lay in the engineering rather than in the architecture. To build the world's tallest buildings in 110 stories took a special kind of genius, and that was really Les Robertson and his partners who came up with a way, a device, a plan in order to realize the architectural simplicity of Yamazaki's concept.
The tallest building I'd ever worked on was 20 or 22 stories. But I had the kind of background that very few structural engineers had. I was a pretty good mathematician. I knew a lot about the dynamics of structures and even the dynamics of electrical circuits. In addition to that, I wasn't burdened with the baggage of having done it before. I could sort of look at all those ideas and choose from them and develop new ones and make, I think, a new kind of building, something that hadn't been created before.
Na manhã de 5 de agosto de 66, começou o trabalho no World Trade Center. O primeiro desafio foram as próprias fundações, que teriam de mergulhar em 21 metros de aterro encharcado, feito ainda pelos ingleses, antes de alcançarem a rocha. Para segurar as águas do Hudson, os engenheiros da Capitania dos Portos construíram uma banheira gigante, 2 quadras de largura por 4 de comprimento e com 7 andares de profundidade. Desenterraram, junto com 1 milhão de metros cúbicos de terra, assombrosas recordações do passado colonial da cidade, tais como âncoras de navio, balas de canhão, cachimbos de barro e moedas britânicas remontando ao reinado de Jorge II. Mas o maior desafio era a engenharia das próprias torres. Desde o início, ficou claro que a exigência por parte da Capitania dos Portos de grandes espaços de área útil flexível e as formas esculturais que Yamazaki projetara exigiriam uma ruptura com as técnicas tradicionais de construção de arranha-céus que já tinham 100 anos de idade.
The Trade Center had a different kind of structure. It was built more like the wing of an airplane. And the wing of the airplane, the strength is all on the surface of the wing, or the fuselage in both cases. All of the interior columns that have been used in the past were a detriment. They were harmful to the design because we didn't want those interior columns. We wanted that weight out on the outside where it would do some good for the stalwartness of the building in resisting these giant loads from the wind.
Robertson sabia que só um projeto assim atenderia aos inéditos requisitos práticos do prédio e contrabalançaria o grande inimigo natural das estruturas esguias. Não a força da gravidade, mas a do vento.
You know, if you put your feet close together and somebody shoves on your shoulder, it's easy for you to fall over. If you put your feet apart and someone shoves on your shoulder, it's easy for you to stand up. And the steel on the outside of the towers was like your feet spread apart. And the shove was like the gusts of the wind, you know, in off the Atlantic Ocean. If you put the steel out there, you could save a lot of money, probably 40% in the total amount of steel. But it also had other implications for how you would use this building. And one of them is that you would have none of these interior columns that hold up the Empire State Building every 20 feet, messing up your floor plan. So anybody could come in and deal with the floors however they wanted to, put up their partitions, and it was kind of real estate paradise. Now, in fact, it was a design that looked great on paper. But when they went out to the wind tunnel in Fort Collins, Colorado, before they put the buildings up, they found out that the structure, when it was really put together, at least in miniature form, didn't work quite the way they'd expected. It just swayed too much, beyond anything that would have been remotely reasonable. In fact, they moved so far that at least one model broke and fell over in the wind. Now, that didn't mean that the real towers would fall over. It just meant that they hadn't taken into account the tremendous forces they were going to be dealing with.
And so we had to rethink the entire process. How much can a building move in the wind? How much would they oscillate? No one had ever found out. No one had ever tried to find out even, or even thought there was an issue to find out about. Not only how much does it move, how much can it move?
And the upshot of it was that Robertson and his collaborator, Alan Davenport, came up with the idea of basically putting shock absorbers in buildings, which had never been done before. And, you know, God darn it, it worked. They kept these things from swaying beyond the tolerances that they'd set.
They could resist an 150-mile wind blowing consecutively on one side of the building for 30 minutes, and they would not fall down. I used to say, they move like a snake. Different from all other buildings in the world, the strength to resist the wind is in the outside walls instead of the elevator core, which is normal for all other high-rise buildings in the world. And so these towers were much stronger, if you would.
The really sublime thing about this, from the point of view of the Port Authority, is that all this is happening in the background, while Austin Tobin is passionately defending these structures against the critics back in New York City, who have no idea that any of this is going on in the background. All it would have taken, probably, was for some of the opponents to know what was going on behind the scenes. When they're out in Colorado, in the wind tunnel, and one of the models fell over, put that in one New York newspaper, and there's no World Trade Center. When they're out in Eugene, Oregon, testing people in a room and people are getting sick as they go back and forth, as the motion of the building is being simulated. Again, put that in one television program in prime time in New York City. Very hard to see how the World Trade Center was going to be built. But the Port Authority successfully walled off that and other information from the public in the way that shows how good they were, how good Austin Tobin was.
Tão inovadoras na construção quanto no projeto, as torres foram montadas não uma coluna por vez, mas em imensas peças pré-montadas, cada uma com 3 andares, o que acelerou muito o processo de construção.
We had experimented with prefabrication in a few buildings, but never even close to the scale that it was done on the World Trade Center. Huge prefabricated elements constructed all over the United States with materials that came from all over the world, and finally assembled into one building in New York City. We had steelwork being fabricated in Los Angeles, in Dallas, in Seattle, in Pittsburgh, in Virginia, and down into Georgia, and up into Canada. And all of that was coordinated through our offices.
No auge da construção, mais de 800 toneladas de estrutura eram entregues a cada dia nos imensos canteiros de obras. Elas eram levantadas aos céus por 4 guindastes canguru construídos na Austrália e reabitadas em seus lugares pelo exército de Austin Tobin, composto por 3.600 homens. Tratava-se de uma equipe extraordinária de operários e especialistas em construção que incluía Carl Furillo, que já fora jogador dos Dodgers do Brooklyn, e um homem de Nova Jersey chamado George Nelson, que 40 anos antes havia ajudado a construir o Empire State e que agora definia trabalhar no World Trade Center como só mais outro prédio.
The Koch erecting set with the incredible people who ran the job. And I still see Mr. Koch from time to time, and I remind him not one iron worker was killed in the construction of the World Trade Center. And this is what they used to do. They'd be up on the steel, and they'd look out, and they'd say, well, we're going to be all right today, boys. Mr. Koch just went to Mass. There's a little Catholic church down there. He went at 8 o'clock every morning, and they said, that takes care of us for the day. And sure enough, not a single iron worker died. Now, of course, the building lent itself to that because we put steel up on the outside walls. So, and then you could only fall 2 or 3 floors if you ever fell off. But that was the way it was.
Antes de entregarem o projeto, Robertson e sua equipe realizaram uma última e sem precedentes verificação de segurança.
One of my jobs was to look at all of the possible events that might take place in a high-rise building. And of course, there had been in New York 2 incidences of aircraft impact, the most famous one, of course, being on the Empire State Building. Now, we were looking at an aircraft not unlike the Mitchell bomber that ran into the Empire State Building. We were looking at an aircraft that was lost in the fog, trying to land. It was a low-flying, slow-flying 707, which was the largest aircraft of its time. And so we made calculations, not anywhere near the level of sophistication we could today, but inside of our ability, we made calculations of what happened when the airplane goes in and it takes out a huge section of the outside wall of the building. And we concluded that it would stand. It would suffer, but it would stand. And the outside wall would have a big hole in it, and the building would be in place. What we didn't look at is what happens to all that fuel. And perhaps we could be faulted for that, for not doing so. But for whatever reason, we didn't look at that question of what would happen to the fuel.
No fim, Robertson e sua equipe fizeram todo o possível para proteger o prédio contra um vento de 500 anos de recorrência, o pior vendaval ao qual o prédio poderia ser submetido em 500 anos. Na época, era inconcebível que ele também tivesse de ser protegido contra um terrível acidente aéreo ou um incêndio de 500 anos de recorrência.
I think, in effect, the towers had an Achilles heel, and that was the fire. They really didn't know much about fire, and they really didn't pay much attention to fire. The structures they finally came up with were just as good as the traditional ones in battling the wind and holding up against gravity. But they were much lighter. The steel was lighter, thinner. And you know how if you slice up an ice cube and put it in your drink, it'll melt faster than if you have a whole ice cube? Well, that's the way of these lighter structures. They would heat up faster in a fire. The real question is, should they have been able to anticipate that this was something that they would have to protect against? And I just don't know the answer to the question.
One of the things that we have to say about the Trade Center, with all due respect to its qualities such as they were, is that it was a dinosaur when it went up. It represented a way of building that had in fact already begun to be discredited. Jane Jacobs' book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which played so large a role in shifting people's viewpoints back toward an appreciation of the street and the real city and the organic nature of cities, had already appeared. And by the time the Trade Center was finished in the 70s, there were lots of other things to express a sort of shift in attitude. So the World Trade Center was an enormous project with a very long gestation period that was sort of out of date by the time it was finished, which made it, in a way, all the sadder.
And then, of course, the Trade Center is finished at a time when the economy is in the toilet. I think that's the best way to put it. The Vietnam War has ripped the country apart. The divisiveness of the young versus the old, the haves versus the have-nots, had never been greater than perhaps except in the case of the Civil War. And there were these two monsters, huge, undifferentiated buildings rising here, and the context around them hadn't even been finished.
Por 3 longos anos, de 1968 a 1971, o trabalho em aço continuava nas torres. Enquanto isso, os anos 60 chegavam e partiam, e a guerra do Vietnã rugia, arrebentando com a economia americana, dificultando a ordem global do pós-guerra e ameaçando rasgar o tecido social da nação. Em abril de 1970, o progresso das torres foi abalado quando os operários tiveram que enfrentar manifestantes pacifistas nas ruas do sul de Manhattan. Então, o sentimento público para com o projeto e seus construtores começara a mudar dramaticamente, e até a vontade de Austin Tobin deixava de ser soberana. Daqui a pouco, uma a uma, as últimas peças das Torres Gêmeas foram colocadas no lugar. Mas os crescentes problemas da cidade cobriram o brilho da comemoração e as críticas ao projeto se tornaram mais agressivas. Em instantes.
Estamos apresentando Nova York, um documentário. Voltamos a apresentar Nova York, um documentário.
As they're building the World Trade Center, after he's given everything he had to put it up, he's starting to battle with New Jersey Governor Cahill. He's losing the battle on mass transit. His reputation in the press is taking a dive. He's always had very careful control of the press, partly through his chief press officer, Lee Jaffe, through all those years. Very carefully managed kind of guy. Someone who didn't have to deal with these little details like legislatures, mayors, the citizenry of New York City. And by the time the towers are finished, it's no longer fun for him. He's really become embittered.
Com as estruturas amesquinhando até as mais altas torres Art Deco da cidade, a animação e o otimismo quanto ao seu imenso tamanho começaram a se desvanecer.
Well, I remember being offended that the title for the tallest building was being taken away from the Empire State Building, a building that I liked much more and felt represented the spirit of New York much better than the World Trade Center. And I remember thinking, you know, this whole thing is a sort of gargantuan piece of banality.
As always happens in New York, buildings come in cycles of boom and bust, and generally the tallest buildings come before the break in the cycle, before a crash. And that was the case with the World Trade Center. The fiscal crisis, the energy crisis, all kinds of crises in New York, a social crisis as well, befell New York in the mid-1970s and affected the fortunes of the city in many ways beyond the sheer revenues of trade and of business.
E ainda assim, as Torres Gêmeas subiram, enquanto a cidade embaixo delas afundava cada vez mais no caos econômico e social. Afinal, às 11h30 de uma manhã nevoenta de quarta-feira, 23 de dezembro de 1970, a última coluna da Torre Norte, uma peça de aço de 11 metros e 4 toneladas, enrolada em uma grande bandeira americana, foi içada até o seu lugar no 110º andar. Para celebrar a grandiosa ocasião, os operários levantaram uma árvore de Natal de 9 metros na esquina sudoeste do edifício.
December 1970. The reason I remember it is the last piece of steel went up and the next day the first tenant moved into the bottom of the building. Actually, 2 tenants moved in that day on the 9th and 10th floors.
7 meses depois, em 19 de julho de 1971, a festa se repetiu na Torre Sul. Ao todo, um total de 192 mil toneladas de aço estrutural, quase 4 vezes mais do que no Empire State, foram levantadas a 415 metros do chão, 25 andares mais alto do que o mais alto andar do adorado Marco de All-Schmidt e 33 metros mais alto do que o topo de seu mastro Art Deco. De forma espantosa, entretanto, o feito ficaria quase ignorado, seu brilho empanado pelos crescentes problemas da cidade lá embaixo e pela onda de críticas que começava a engolir o projeto em vias de complementação. Desde o início, a reação da imprensa às torres de Yamazaki fora selvagem. Um crítico as denegriu como um monumento erigido ao tédio arquitetônico. Outro, como a maior esquadria de alumínio da história mundial.
The towers are pure technology. The lobbies are pure schmaltz. And the impact on New York is pure speculation. The windows are so narrow that one of the miraculous benefits of the tall building, the panoramic view out, is destroyed. These are big buildings, but they are not great architecture. Ada Louise Huxtable, 1971.
O próprio Yamazaki, mesmo arrasado pela tempestade de críticas, teimosamente defendia seu projeto, argumentando publicamente que a vista reduzida mantinha os funcionários de escritório concentrados no trabalho.
Of course, people hated, working in the Trade Center. The reason it was filled up is because the space was cheaper than a comparable space in lower buildings. They hated it because the elevator system was a nuisance to go up and down. It was like you planned whether you had to actually leave your office because it was so inconvenient. I think the Trade Center was also a terrible failure on an urban design level or a public space level. The plaza was dead. Plaza managed to be dead not only in day-to-day use or even at the occasional festival that could never quite fill it, but even in the movies when they made The Wiz or when they made the second version of King Kong, it still couldn't come to life. It just resisted vitality.
Enquanto isso, para a Capitania dos Portos, problemas bem mais imediatos se avolumavam. Quase que de imediato, a premissa básica sobre a qual as torres foram construídas, a premência de concentrar negócios relacionados ao comércio sob o único teto, mostrou ter pouco lastro de realidade. Apesar de vigorosos esforços para divulgar o complexo, poucos inquilinos se habilitaram.
At the beginning, because there was not nearly enough business to fill it, it was bailed out by its builders. Governor Nelson Rockefeller committed to putting offices of the state of New York into one tower, and the Port Authority moved all of its own offices into the other. So, in fact, it was mostly a big civic boondoggle, in effect, and had only a minimal amount of tenants who were actually part of the original concept.
No início dos anos 70, o World Trade Center, cujo custo final elevou-se acima de $1 bilhão, perdia 10 a 15 milhões de dólares por ano, sem perspectiva de melhora. E notícia ainda pior esperava pelo mercado imobiliário do Centro-Sul. Em vez de revitalizar as fortunas do sul de Manhattan, o World Trade Center inundou o mercado com milhões de metros quadrados de espaço de escritórios indesejado, aprofundando as atribulações econômicas do distrito ainda mais.
So by somehow bringing all these many millions, 10 million square feet of office space online at the time that this economic recession, I'm pulling people out of your building to come into mine, subsidized by the government. Your building then is not worth as much because your building, by the way, does pay taxes. And yet you've got fewer tenants. So that what we have done here in New York City, at least according to the critics, was we built a new building that we don't need. We've reduced the value of the old buildings that we already had, and we're paying taxes and supporting the police and the schools and fire and everything else. So we've, in a sense, compounded our mistake.
I think when the Trade Center was finished in 1973, we were just at the moment when New York was about to begin descending rather than ascending. The fiscal crisis would hit. The buildings would remain largely empty for many years. They would consume the kind of energy on their floors with fluorescent lights that had only one switch and were simply on or off. There was in every way a kind of symbol of empty wastefulness that represented an overreaching ambition, perhaps on the part of Americans, and a blind eye to the environment and to other kinds of social equations that seem to be lost in this sort of blank symbolism of these two great icons.
Na manhã chuvosa e cheia de vento de 4 de abril de 1973, enquanto o trabalho nos andares superiores continuava, a Capitania dos Portos realizou uma cerimônia dedicada ao complexo, um evento taciturno que o mau tempo obrigou fosse transferido da praça para o saguão da Torre Norte. O convidado de honra, o secretário do Trabalho Peter Brennan, não compareceu, nem o prefeito de Nova York, John Lindsay. E, para espanto dos presentes, nem sequer o maior responsável pelo projeto, Austin Tobin, que havia se aposentado da Capitania dos Portos no ano anterior, exaurido e decepcionado. Quando um repórter perguntou por que ele havia perdido a histórica cerimônia, Tobin respondeu apenas: porque estava chovendo.
He was not there at the official opening of the World Trade Center. He never moved into the World Trade Center. And he really hardly goes down there until he is dying of cancer. So is it sad? Yes, it's extremely sad. It's a very sad and unexpected end to the story, because this guy was one of the most powerful and most efficient and admired and studied bureaucratic leaders in the history of the United States. But his crowning achievement turns out to be, in the end, a big drop of bitterness for him.
You know, we named the plaza the Austin Tobin Plaza only after he left. And Austin, we knew, was very sick. And I think of all the projects that the Port Authority did, I think Austin felt that the Trade Center was his greatest. And I got a call one day, and he came down in a wheelchair. And I wheeled him out to the plaza. And he asked if he could be left alone. And Austin sat in that wheelchair for almost 2 hours. And he looked at the plaza and the great sculpture that was in the plaza, and he could see the hotel and the customs house and the commodity building, and the Nagari sculpture is beautiful, and Fritz Koenig's sculpture, which was in the middle of that fountain. You know, those were great works of art. And I remember leaving him there, and then I came and got him. And I never saw him again after that. He died almost within weeks after that one moment, 2 hours, being out there looking at the plaza of the World Trade Center, named after him.
O episódio mais sublime e transcendente de toda a história do World Trade Center ocorreu nos primeiros e mais difíceis anos após a sua inauguração. A cidade passava pela maior crise financeira de sua história e as torres, inacabadas nos andares superiores, se mostravam como um monumento extravagante ao disparate e à ambição desmedida. Durante 6 anos, após ter um insight em um consultório dentário em Paris, Philippe Petit alimentou seu sonho, aperfeiçoando-se como equilibrista e lendo tudo o que encontrava sobre as Torres Gêmeas. No início de janeiro de 1974, foi a Nova York pela primeira vez para pôr em ação a fase seguinte da aventura a que se referia como o golpe. Ele tinha 24 anos de idade.
When I came to New York, it was winter, and I had a little journal or a little whatever. I wrote my thoughts, and I thought, it's old, it's dirty, it's full of skyscrapers. I love it. That was my first little entry, the first day I saw New York. I remember my first encounter with the Twin Towers. I got out of the subway, it was a long subway ride, and out of the darkness, I emerged at the base of one of the tower and look up, and like a slap in the face, I saw that my dream was impossible. I mean, it was right there in aluminum and glass and steel and concrete behind it. It was right there. It said impossible. And yet, somehow, I actually find myself trespassing over the plaza, still under construction, and sneaking in one of the tower and climbing inside the building until I find myself very close to the top, and until there were no more windows, no more partitions. They were just the skeleton, the beautiful steel columns and beams of the building. And then I emerged, and there were no gates, there were nothing to protect you from the devouring void. And I stand and I looked, and the second I look at the other tower, another time the word impossible etched itself inside me. But somehow I went back down and looked again from the street, and there I realized it's impossible, but I'll do it. And there was the beginning of a second wave of work, the real work, the work of getting into the building, not into archaeological findings or architectural magazines, but this time it was the monster, the beast, getting into the belly of the beast every day, which I did, hiding myself, disguising myself, sneaking, being caught, abandoning the project, going back to it for 8 months, 8 months in New York. And the towers, the more I got to know them, the more they become an ally. That's why when I say I conquered them, probably it's wrong. I married them, certainly. But they became my friends.
It was 1974, and remember now, I had opened the tower at the end of 70, and I wanted public relations. I needed publicity. I had at least 10 million, 12 million square feet of space. And one day, a young journalist, he said he was, named Philippe Petit from France, showed up in my office with 2 photographer friends of his. These were his buddies. And he said, you know, I'd like to do an article on the World Trade Center. And I said, welcome, that's great. And naturally, I never asked, show me your credentials. And later on, I recognized that the subject always got back to how do those towers move in the wind?
Após 8 meses de partidas falsas, anulações de última hora, adiamentos e atrasos torturantes, o momento do golpe finalmente chegou. Às 18 horas da terça-feira, 6 de agosto de 1974, enquanto um grupo seguiu para a Torre Norte, Petit, completamente exausto e fervilhando na loucura de seu sonho, subiu ao topo da Torre Sul com 2 cúmplices que fingiram ser entregadores. Levaram consigo 3 caixotes abarrotados de equipamento, incluindo uma vara de equilíbrio desmontada, fios, 75 metros de cabo de aço trançado de 25 milímetros de diâmetro e um arco e
The first
flecha.
problem was how to pass the cable across, how to pass the first line, which will ultimately become a rope strong enough to pull the heavy steel cable. So how to get that fishing line across? It's like 200 feet from center of roof to center of roof, roughly. We had all kind of ideas, and the idea that prevailed was the one I thought was ridiculous. It was a bow and arrow, but it actually worked. So with a fishing line and a bow and arrow, we passed the first line across, and then all night we pulled, and then the cable was secured.
Foi preciso uma noite inteira para concluir a complexa tarefa. Fixar e tensionar o máximo possível o estreito cabo de 25 milímetros a uma altura de meio quilômetro, através dos 40 metros que separavam as imensas torres. Daqui a pouco você vai ver o final desta inacreditável aventura. Em instantes.
Estamos apresentando Nova York, um documentário. Voltamos a apresentar Nova York, um documentário.
Wall Street começava a despertar, quando um pouco depois das 7 horas, na manhã de 7 de agosto de 1974, Philippe pisou no cabo estreito e bambo estendido sobre o imenso desfiladeiro.
Whenever other worlds invite us, whenever we are balancing on the boundaries of our limited human condition, that's where life starts. That's where you start feeling yourself living. So when I found myself 1 foot on the wire, 1 foot on the building, and ready to decide to shift my way to become a bird, it was not something new. And after a few steps, I knew I was in my element. I didn't even take the full length of the crossing to get to know the rigging and the vibration of the building and the wire. And then very slowly as I walked, I was overwhelmed by a sense of easiness, a sense of simplicity. And actually I can be seen on the first pictures smiling probably out of disbelief. It's so easy after all those years and months of ups and downs and detours, victories and disasters. Finally, I was carrying my life on a path that was the simplest, the most beautiful, and the easiest.
Na rua, milhares de pessoas a caminho do trabalho olhavam para cima, maravilhadas e perplexas, paralisadas pela visão de uma figura minúscula caminhando no ar entre as duas torres.
Somehow I found myself spending 45 minutes and doing 8 crossings. There were thousands of people, at some point 100,000 people. And actually, at some point, during these different crossings, I actually could hear my audience a quarter of a mile below. And I could hear them punctuating what I was doing on the wire. Let's say if I would take a bow on one leg or salute the horizon or kneel in front of the tower to say hello to the tower, I would hear almost with an echo the people cheering, screaming, applauding.
I had in my car a radio that connected me to the police desk at the World Trade Center. And on the day in question, the light went on. And the patrolman at the police desk said, "Mr. T, there's a problem in the World Trade Center." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "There's a guy walking on a tightrope between the two towers. What should we do?" And I couldn't think of anything else. I said, "Don't let him fall off." And I hung up. So then I drove a little further. I called back. I said, "By the way, this is incredible. There's somebody walk. If he doesn't fall off and he comes on, don't arrest him."
Em poucos minutos, policiais foram enviados ao topo da Torre Sul. O sargento Charles Daniels, do Departamento de Polícia da Capitania dos Portos, nunca esqueceu o que viu naquele dia.
Well, after arriving on the rooftop, Officer Myers and I observed the tightrope dancer, because you couldn't call him a walker, approximately halfway between the two towers. And upon seeing us, he started to smile and laugh, and he started going into a dancing routine on the high wire. He then went down to one knee, and we stepped to the background. I said for everyone to be quiet. And at this time, he laid down on the high wire and, just lackadaisically rolled around on the wire like. He got up, he started walking and laughing and dancing, and he turned around and ran back out into the middle. He was bouncing up and down. His feet were actually leaving the wire, and then he would resettle back on the wire again. Unbelievably, really, to the point that everybody was spellbound in the watching of it. And I personally figured I was watching something that somebody else would never see again in the world. Thought it was once in a lifetime.
During the walks, I had a sense of dancing on top of the world. I had a sense of having a communion with the city of New York, represented by the crowd below. I had a sense of having stepped in otherworldly matters. And at some point in one of the crossing, I lay down on the wire and looked at the sky, and I saw a bird above me. And again, because of my sense were decuplated, I could see that bird pretty high up, and I saw the eyes were red, and I thought of the myth of Prometheus there. But the bird was circling and looking at me as if I was invading his territory. as if I was trespassing, which I was. So at some point I thought the gods, the god of the wind, the gods of the towers, the god of the wire, all those invisible forces that we persist in thinking they don't exist, but actually that rule our lives, might become impatient, might become annoyed by my persistent vagabondage there. So my intuition told me it was time for me to close the curtain of this very intimate performance. It was a walk between me and the towers, and I landed on the same tower from which I started, the South Tower, and then I had the octopus of the authority, you know, grab me by their hundreds of arms.
Quando desceu, Petit foi detido e imediatamente levado a uma delegacia localizada no subsolo da Torre Sul, onde foi acusado de 14 contravenções, entre elas invasão de propriedade, desobediência a ordens policiais, comportamento perigoso e apresentação sem permissão. Depois foi cercado por um exército de repórteres.
Why did you do this?
Oh, that's the thousand why this morning. There is no why. Just because when I see a beautiful place to put my why, I cannot resist.
Weren't you afraid up there at all?
I was not afraid, but I was just looking what I have in front of me. I have really something which was huge and incredible, you know. So afraid not, but leaving more than 1,000%. So perhaps that's close to afraid, I don't know. But at the same time, I was happy.
You need dreams to live. It's as essential as a road to walk on and as bread to eat. I would have felt myself dying if this dream would have been taken away from me by reason. The dream was as big as the towers. There was no way it could be taken away from me by authority, by reason, by destiny. It was really anchored to me in such a way that life was not conceivable without doing this.
A impressionante proeza na corda bamba foi o ápice na vida de Philippe Petit e, sob diversos aspectos, na vida das Torres Gêmeas. Como Guy Tozoli havia previsto, a façanha foi primeira página em todo o país e no mundo inteiro. Petit logo se tornou um herói popular, especialmente em Nova York. No fim, em grande parte graças a Tozoli, que intercedeu junto ao juiz, todas as acusações foram retiradas e a sentença do francês de 24 anos foi convertida em se apresentar para crianças no Central Park.
Philippe Petit was the first person to humanize these things. You know, he put a human mark on them. He said, I don't care about your architect and your plans for world trade. I'm going to walk this thing. And there he did, doing this amazing feat in which the whole city applauded. Because, first of all, it took guts and skill. But also it took these two buildings and he conquered them in some astonishing way that had the whole town cheering. But it was an astonishing moment. And after that, it never happened again. It's as if you did that once. It was not to be repeated.
Fabulous, you know, it's just that this guy had done this and it made the towers belong, if you would, more to New York.
Petit nunca deixou de amar profundamente as torres. Em honra ao seu feito, a Capitania dos Portos concedeu a ele um passe vitalício à plataforma de observação da Torre Sul, onde, em uma tarde ensolarada e cheia de vento, pouco depois de sua caminhada histórica, assinou seu nome com tinta indelével em uma viga de aço sobre o vasto cânion onde dançou entre as nuvens. Nos anos seguintes, ele retornou várias vezes ao local, tentando em vão reviver em pensamento a sua incrível caminhada e encontrar mais uma vez a gaivota que vira pairando acima de si a meio quilômetro do chão. Ela nunca apareceu. Poucos se deram conta na época, mas o feito de Petit representou um marco crucial na vida das Torres Gêmeas e na vida da cidade que as abrigava. Nas décadas seguintes, o destino de ambas passaria por uma grande transformação. A cidade, antes cambaleante, deixou para trás os momentos negros da crise fiscal e retomou seu crescimento de forma inesperada. E o World Trade Center, alvo de zombaria quando foi inaugurado em 1971, finalmente começou a fazer jus ao seu nome promissor.
Well, in many ways, the World Trade Center didn't look to most Americans like something that had anything to do with world trade. It was a little bit like the World Series, not really having much to do with the rest of the world. It might have been more convincing if it had been called something like the Manhattan Business Center. For the rest of the world, though, it came to be the quintessential expression of globalization in the sense that New York was the capital of the world economy. And in that sense, the two tallest towers in New York were really bound to symbolize economic globalization, even if people living in Manhattan just thought they were the biggest shadow-casting pieces of real estate downtown.
As primeiras mudanças ocorreram enquanto a cidade ainda se debatia em meio à crise fiscal. Em 1975, a plataforma de observação no topo da Torre Sul foi aberta à visitação pública e logo se tornou uma das mais populares atrações turísticas da cidade. Um ano depois, em 4 de julho de 1976, a celebração do bicentenário da nação teve o seu clímax no porto de Nova York, onde milhares de barcos e dúzias de navios participaram de uma majestosa parada, tendo como pano de fundo as sublimes Torres Gêmeas. No mesmo ano, um fantástico restaurante panorâmico abriu as portas no 106º e 107º andares da Torre Norte. Logo percebi, escreveu o crítico gastronômico Gale Green, que Nova York sobreviveria. Se o dinheiro, o poder e o orgulho puderam criar um lugar tão extraordinário, também poderiam resgatar a cidade das cinzas.
The observation deck and windows on a world were the two things, in my judgment, that turned the city of New York from looking at the Trade Center as some monster downtown to something that was theirs. They began to adopt it, and it was great. It was so successful that you had to wait 7 months to get a Saturday night reservation there unless you knew somebody. It was incredible. And we were consistently the highest grossing restaurant in the whole world.
These kinds of things give a building a human dimension. One would hope that the building would have a human dimension in its design. That has always been debatable. It's the case of the Trade Center. But events did happen that showed that this could be brought into the city and into the life of the city. Another thing about the Trade Center that changed it was the whole changing character of Lower Manhattan. People began to live downtown, and they rather liked the Trade Center, the big open space. And then the people living in Tribeca, also the people living in Battery Park City, began to see these buildings as an identifiable landmark in their neighborhoods, in their daily lives. You know, you could orient yourself. You knew where you were in relationship to the Trade Center towers.
Now, as the years went on and we reached the period of the 90s with the great boom in financial services businesses needed much more space, and they gradually took over space as the state moved away to other locations, as Port Authority moved some of its functions out and so forth. That stuff was rented commercially.
The Trade Center took nearly a generation to become truly successful. Through the 1980s, the buildings filled up. In the 1990s, they became truly profitable and gained a kind of credibility in the commercial real estate market that had been predicted at the very beginning but not realized for over 20 years.
And it turned out fine. The Trade Center was self-supporting. In fact, when I retired from the Port Authority of New York in 1987, the World Trade Center in New York was making more than $133 million a year, net. So, you know, it worked, and then all those buildings in Lower Manhattan, all the jobs that it created for people.
Even though we thought of them as a failure, I think now, looking back, we can see what they did contribute. First of all, economically, had they not been there, In the late 1990s, when New York City suddenly boomed, practically like no place on the planet, the city needed all 10, 15 million square feet of office space that those buildings provided. If they were not there, so many other companies would have had to go elsewhere. So we had that space. So in a sense, they helped make possible the renaissance of New York in the 1990s.
Now, the reality was that these huge office blocks built for commercial purposes were becoming more and more centers for world trade and world transactions generally. So in a way, the World Trade Center became more and more truly a World Trade Center over time, and by the 1990s, perhaps for the first time, really was worthy of that name. And I'm not sure how far Americans, particularly New Yorkers, quite saw that it was a symbol of economic globalization.
No próximo programa, uma tragédia que deixou o mundo perplexo. Em setembro de 2001, como em um pesadelo, as torres gêmeas do World Trade Center desabam após o choque de 2 aviões. Não perca!